of the market towards what they really should be doing in the world, where they could be the best in the world. And so I wrote this for founders who find themselves in that situation, which is I feel stuck. It could be stuck where I've got 2 years of runway. It could be stuck where I've run out of cash. It could be stuck and I'm profitable. But at some point, I got in this little eddy, right? I can't stop flowing down the river, and I got stuck in this little eddy, and I'm not moving forward, and I'm not meeting the expectations of myself, my executive team, the employees, the investors. So what do we do?
Yeah.
That was what I wrote the book for. This is the book that I wish I had as a young CEO.
And did Jive kind of run into this situation at some point? I mean, you bootstrapped it, you raised a bunch of money. Did you guys hit that kind of eddy of some sort?
We did, and then that eddy happened after my time too. And yeah, we bootstrapped for 5 years, and the company was very successful.
Welcome to the Ignite podcast. Thanks for coming back. Today, we're delighted to have Dave Hersh on the program. He has been an entrepreneur, investor, advisor, author, which I'm excited to dive into some of the findings from his book that he just wrote. CEO of Jive Software. I've heard of those guys, pretty big company. And then he was a board partner at Andreessen Horowitz. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Dave.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Would love to get an intro from you for the audience.
Sure. Yeah. So you did a good one already. I started my career as a management consultant way back when, actually helping big companies. This was way back in the mid 90s when Lotus Notes was a thing, believe it or not. And my role was a young consultant helping big companies understand what collaboration software really was and how to work as one company. So that idea stuck with me into the founding of Jive Software, which you mentioned. We started that one. My first day to meet my co-founders was September 11th in New York City. So needless to say, yeah, it was a rough time to start a company. Yep, exactly. Oh, wow. Not a lot of money to be had at the time, as you can imagine. So we bootstrapped it and bootstrapped it for 5 years. And it was a great run, and eventually moved it to Portland, Oregon, and then set up shop in Palo Alto. But the first 5 years were all bootstrapped, built out a healthy $12 million business. And then Facebook came online, and we're like, yeah, there's this huge opportunity in the enterprise to take these ideas behind Facebook. And so reinvented the company around a new product. So end of life all the old revenue, raised 15 million from Sequoia, and started a path towards a new direction. And went 0 to 60 million on that new business over the next 3 years, at which point I was fried, had little kids, and, just in a difficult situation in life where I had to decide, public company CEO or good dad and husband, and, made the path to move down to California. And then the company went public in 2011 while I moved on to other things. And that was incubating companies, investing, advising, sitting on boards, worked in private equity for a while. As you mentioned, worked in Andreessen Horowitz for a while, and, kind of came at the whole industry from every angle, and eventually was able to see some of the inherent waste in the system and some of the inherent flaws. And so I got in a mode of saying, look, this is, venture capital is a hits business, meaning it makes its money on 1 out of 10 companies doing really well. But for those other 9 companies, there's actually some pretty interesting things happening in there. And for a lot of them, if they had taken a slightly different path and maybe not raised as much or tried to scale that early, could have been something pretty special and could have been in that 10%, or at least increased that 10% number. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell, but as it relates to why I wrote the book and, how I got into this world.
Yeah, so much to unpack there and learn. Let's talk about, let's start with the problem, right? What are some of the inefficiencies and problems you saw with this model? And let's dig into that and kind of, because that drove kind of the writing of the book, right?
It did. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of them could be avoided. And, to be clear up front, the book is not anti-VC. The book is maybe anti-too much VC too early. Right. Yeah. I wouldn't get a lot of speaking engagements if I went
exactly with VCs.
Yeah.
Come on, just bash us.
I think venture capital is really important, right? It's important to the system. However, as mentioned, it is a hits business right now. And, it is a model that places a lot of different bets and makes its return on, I think the calculation is 11 to 12% of its companies. But the entrepreneurs on the other side, less. Yeah, it depends on the, what type of firm it is and what their investment thesis
stage
is. But,
and all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah. So you have this 10% likelihood of success on the one hand, and then you have entrepreneurs who believe they have an 82% likelihood of success on the other. And what you realize is that some of these companies should never exist. They are science experiments. They try and fail, right? And that's about 30 to 40% of companies. And that's at the other end of that 10%. But in between, you have this 50 to 60% of companies that actually have promise, that may have found product market fit, that had some traction. Customers love the product. But what I saw happening systemically was companies and entrepreneurs trying to perpetuate a form of theater where they were showing their company as further along than it was in order to raise money. And that's a snowball problem, right? Because once you tell one firm, and the structure under which you raise that money and the expectations are such that you have to keep, staying on that train. And that's a really hard one to
all of a
catch
sudden you
up
close
to.
a big deal and you multiply that by 52 and you're like, that's my my forward revenue. And you're like, well, you just closed that one big deal. You can close another big deal next week.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I have done. I have done that very mistake myself, so I totally get it. An N of one
VCs
problem.
can smell that out so fast. I mean, good to VCs anyway. Like I'm such a high volume investor. I see so many decks and so many pitches that I just get a lot of at bats and made a lot of mistakes as well. But I can kind of fish it out a little bit, and it's almost like an automatic no in due diligence when you kind of start diving in. You're like, you kind of like weren't exactly honest here on this slide on your traction. Stuff like that happens.
It does. And I think a lot of VCs are more attuned to it. But even ones that, I've worked with that are really high end, work for really good firms, they just don't have as much time to spend on it to really, understand what's happening under the hood. And, I think for founders, they have so much on their shoulders, so much responsibility, and they feel like I can save my company and the team that's loyal to me, and we can be perceived as doing really well if we raise this round. And so, they'll maybe stretch the truth a little bit further than they should, as opposed to staying leaner longer and in education mode longer, right? And collecting data points that will make decisions really, beyond a shadow of a doubt, this is the right decision and this is the way we should, move towards the market that we should be selling to. So I saw them pushing product on a market that wasn't ready more often than I saw them waiting and listening for the pull of the market towards what they really should be doing in the world, where they can be the best in the world. And so I wrote this for founders who find themselves in that situation, which is, I feel stuck. And it could be stuck where I've got 2 years of runway. It could be stuck where I've run out of cash. It could be stuck and I'm profitable. But at some point, I got in this little eddy, right? I stopped flowing down the river and I got stuck in this little eddy, and I'm not moving forward. And I'm not meeting the expectations of myself, my executive team, the employees, the investors. So what do we do? Right. That was what I wrote the book for. This is the book that I wish I had had as a young CEO.
Right. And did Jive kind of run into this situation at some point? I mean, you bootstrapped it, you raised a bunch of money. Did you guys hit that kind of eddy of some sort?
We did. And then that eddy happened after my time too. Right. And we bootstrapped for 5 years and the company was highly successful and really strong culture. Everybody loved working there. We were much like Atlassian in the early days. They were actually kind of an analog because they started at the same time. We were friends with them. They were 2 guys, we were 3 guys, and we just kind of went off. And then we went this enterprise direction. And what happened was anytime we'd raise money, we would go, oh, I guess we're supposed to do this thing. I guess this is the playbook that we're supposed to run. So we would eschew intuition for playbook thinking because we thought that was what we were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so
it's like, okay, we raised a such and such Series A. Here's what you do with that money. Typically.
Exactly.
The VC took a board seat, so they're kind of telling you this is what you should do. It kind of comes with a little bit of stipulations from that VC.
Yeah. And there's certainly great things that they could bring, but I think I was so insecure, in getting these fancy investors involved that I was like, all right, well, tell me what to do and I'll just go execute on it, as opposed to, my intuition is telling me we should do this thing. And so we hired a lot of people and tried to spend the money and tried to grow really quickly. And of course, we did that through the lens of the older leadership team who was focused on a different type of go-to-market entirely. And we hired the wrong people and we got bloated. And so we had to streamline, build out a new management team. And, the gist is that in periods of austerity and when we were lean, purposeful, disciplined, focused on, what really mattered and not trying to over execute on growth, we did really well. The company was on fire. In periods where we raised too much money, we hired the wrong people, we got bloated, we made mistakes and had to correct those mistakes later.
Now, looking back, is it that you just should have raised less money instead of taking all the 25 million or whatever it was at the time? Maybe you're like, you know what, I only need 5 million to hit the next milestone here that that I think is important for the company versus, taking like all of it?
I think there's two things. There's one, which is what's the strategy decision that was made, and was that the right one? And I think the strategy decision to go up market towards enterprise seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Ultimately, was too far removed from our core. And a lot of this book, a lot of the book that I wrote is about what is your core, really understanding your superpower and
Mm,
where you're the best in the world, and trying to use that as the basis for natural growth in the world. And we pivoted too much towards trying to compete against IBM and Microsoft, and going up market and doing much bigger deals. And that ultimately
yeah.
was a strategic decision that slowed the company down over time. And then the financing decision should always follow strategy. So it's less, is it the right financing, than is it irresponsible not to raise money, and is this the right amount of money to fulfill the growth plan that we put together that is ideal for the market that we're serving. And I don't see that one as often. What I see too often is entrepreneurs going, well, if we can get to this metrics and this metrics, then we can raise an A round or the B
Yeah.
round, and then we'll get here so we can raise our C round. And that's just kind of tail wagging the dog mentality, as
Yeah.
opposed to what are you really doing in the world, and who's buying your product, and how big is that market, and what can you serve, and how do you do it the right way. And so financing should always be in the back seat. It should not be driving the car. It should be
Yeah. It's like we have the
supporting.
plan, we have the strategy, we know what we need to do, who we're doing it for. And turns out we need $5 or $10 million to execute on that based on revenue and burn and all that stuff. It's not the other way around where we're like, hey, we raised 25 million and now we're just going to go like just burn through 2 million a month trying to execute on something that the Series B investor says we should.
Yeah, exactly. In the book, I tell the story of DocSend. If you know them, they,
Yeah.
great company. Everybody knew them really well. I mean, their core was this self-service, easy up and on way to embed documents as links as opposed to attachments and emails, and then you could get metrics on it and everything else. And they were great at that. They saw opportunity in going after sales enablement and trying to sell to big enterprise sales teams. So they raised $8 million to go after enterprise sales teams, and just got clobbered in the market because they were the small guy competing against companies that had raised hundreds of millions. And it was just, painful. They spent so much money on sales and marketing. And eventually they
Mm.
pulled back and were like, this isn't working. And they went back to their core, and they did this thing called Project Couch Change, where they were like, let's go back to what we do really well, and let's just figure out small ways we can increase revenue by $50,000, right?
Mm.
That'll be our benchmark. And so they started doing all these little tweaks and doing customer discovery. And it was essentially getting back to their core. And, within a couple months, they had actually increased revenue by 500K and figured
Mm.
out all kinds of, huge levers they could pull. And it took them years and a lot of money to get to $4 million of revenue on that
Yeah.
sales enablement strategy. But within a couple of years, they were at 13 million in revenue, didn't have to raise any more money. Actually, what happened was, as soon as they figured out what worked and how to get back to their core, investors came knocking at their door, and they had a term sheet for $20 million. And instead they took $5 million and never touched it.
Wow.
And
Just
then
kind of left it there for rainy day.
yeah, because this is what we do really well. This is what people know us for. We're the best in the world at this thing. Let's go back to our roots, but let's figure it out and let's learn again. And let's use that as the basis for healthy, sustainable growth. And
Yeah,
then
I
they were
think what
bought
you're
by
just
Dropbox for
yeah,
165 million, right?
great outcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like they only raised like one or two rounds, it sounded like, or maybe two or three rounds. So they didn't have
Yeah,
a
two
lot of
rounds, like
dilution.
one round to try to do this
Yeah.
sales enablement thing. That didn't work. And then they figured out what did work. And then everybody was knocking on their door wanting to invest. And they're like, we don't really need it. But they did take some just to have a cushion, never touched it, and built out a very successful business that was acquired, just a couple of years later.
Yeah, and that's interesting because now you have two or three co-founders. I don't know how many co-founders there were, and they only took 30% dilution, call it 30-40%. And now they got, 30, 60, 70% of $165 million outcome. That's life-changing money. That's like never have to work again, could do whatever I want whatever I want to create for the world, versus, maybe if they would have kept raising big, excessive rounds to go after this, bigger market that was a much tougher slog, they end up with a much lower percentage of the company much later at maybe a similar valuation.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but it took a while to get there, right? They had to make that mistake. And I think there's a lot of stories like that, that I
Yeah.
think if entrepreneurs just knew and had a better intuition for what that was, then they wouldn't run into these problems of scaling prematurely, going after the wrong markets, over identifying with the business. So it becomes an extension of who they are, and they feel like, its success or failure is
Yeah.
my success or failure. And
Well, I think
so,
what you're also describing, which is interesting, that I'd love to get your thoughts on, is kind of this when sales and marketing creeps in, and I have a sales and marketing background. I built MarTech, I've done sales, done demand gen, but I've also built product, and I know how important product is. And I think what you're describing is when, oh, we think we have something here, let's go after this big market. And so they raise a bunch of money and just start spending god awful amounts of money going after turning on the sales and marketing engine that the market's not even ready for it. You're not really solving their problem in the best way. You're not the best in the world at it. And really, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, but like maybe sales and marketing should be positioned as more like we're responding to the demand that we already have, not trying to go out there and create demand. Because if you have something really great, people will beat a path to your door to buy it. And so really like this story of DocSend, I think is exemplary of this, where they went back to their core and their core users, did the customer discovery, and really discovered like, what do we need to build here that we can actually grow, rather than let's just try to go pound people over the head with sales marketing.
yeah, that's a brilliant way to think about it. And I think if more entrepreneurs could feel that, like that was what Jive was in the early days, right? It was like, we have way more customers coming in than we can handle right now. Like, we need to hire somebody to deal with this. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, they're just, we can't even keep up with the amount of inbound that we're getting.
Yeah, I love
right?
to see
That's
wait
where you
lists
want to
up
be.
into the right wait list. Yeah, we have 1,000 people on the wait list, and we literally can't onboard them because we need, this X, Y, and Z to do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And so you hire, you raise money, you scale up sales and marketing when it's irresponsible not to, and when it's the market pulling you into something. But you're right that a lot of them, especially product founders who haven't scaled these teams before, that's hard, right? And they don't know, and they want to go hire the fanciest people they can find to go build out the machinery of sales and marketing. And by the time they figure out you're not really ready for that, and that wasn't the right thing to do, it's too late, and you've wasted a lot of money, and you're stuck.
Yeah. So what are some of these other eddies that you've wrote about in your book or have experienced?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk not only about what happens to get companies stuck in the way that we think about it, meaning if you go say, what are the common reasons for failure? You see things like product market fit and founders didn't get along, or legal issues, or got outcompeted. What I attempted to do is go a little behind that and go, what were some of the egoic challenges that get in the way of this? What are the psychological blind spots sometimes that entrepreneurs find themselves in? The fears, the doubts, the insecurities. In some cases, I've worked with people with more greed and just wanting to, get too much too quickly, because oftentimes it's hard for me to come into a company and help transform it unless they confront the inner challenges they had that led to getting stuck in the first place, right? The company won't transform until they do. So that's a big part of it, is not necessarily what we think about in terms of why companies get stuck, but what are the blind spots that they have behind that coaches and other forms of inner transformational work are going to help and give them a much higher likelihood of success. And making sure that board members support those shifts as well, and can help entrepreneurs through not only changing but through difficult times. Right, it's a really, really hard job to be a founder and to take on all that responsibility for everybody, and it creates a lot of inner suffering that oftentimes they suffer alone.
Everybody's relying on you. The single point of failure, you feel like, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Just tonight, I'm facilitating a dinner of 25 founders and VCs about what's the future of the enlightened board member. Right? How do you support founders, right? Because we're shifting in our understanding of what founders go through and what are the conditions under which they're going to make the best decisions and give the company the best chance of success. And it can't just be, we'll hire or fire you, right? That era is over. We have to walk the line between tough love, but also empathy, and helping CEOs be their best as well as the rest of the leadership team. So to me, what I saw happening is not just the strategic and structural problems that lead to getting stuck in eddies, but the underlying psychological challenges that may, perpetuate those problems a lot of times. Not to say that all entrepreneurs suffer that, but I saw it happen enough that it was important for me to cover that territory as well.
Do you think, in the same vein, are founders made or discovered, or are they kind of forged in the fires of being an entrepreneur, or is it the truth somewhere in between?
Yeah, I want to believe that it's forged in the fire more so.
Yeah,
That the sandpaper of being in the trenches is much more important over the long run. I feel like everybody's got it in them to
yeah,
do something. If this is what they want to do, then you'll find a way. But oftentimes, maybe we don't give them the best sandpaper to shape who they are and,
yeah,
their presence as a leader and what they need to be for the company at different stages of its life cycle
yeah,
and how to go through those shifts. So I think there's a lot more we can do. And I think we're realizing how much external success is tied to internal transformation and development.
yeah. What else from the book would you like to talk about that's relevant for maybe potential founders and VCs out there? That's most of our audience, by the way.
Yeah, so the book goes through first why do startups get stuck? It goes into, can it be turned around?
Mm,
Is there, does it have a future? And a lot of that comes down to, is there a core to the business and do you have conviction? And is there enough runway, right?
yeah,
And then, as I mentioned, the blind spots that can lead to getting stuck that you have to confront in order to go through a transformation. And then it goes through the process. And a lot of the process is about understanding your core. Because what I see happen is the business is really good at one thing and they're the best in the world at that. And the pressure for growth forces them to obfuscate that core to try
yeah,
to grow too quickly across too many fronts. And that may take the form of going to, selling to too many different verticals, or,
yeah.
trying to go, through a channel route as well as direct, or, having a
Mm,
consumer product and a small business product and an enterprise product and things like
yeah,
that are just focus challenges. And, when I come in, I have to get them back to what is your superpower and cut out everything else, including all the people. That's a hard thing to go through. But what it does is streamlines the business and you can dedicate cash flow and focus to being the best in the world at that thing again and being really good at it and being streamlined around that core.
yeah.
And then you can thoughtfully experiment with growth. Then you can do things like Project Couch Change that DocSend did and, find those pockets of growth that are an extension of your core business.
Yeah. How do you know the
Um,
difference? Like, I think founders, especially as they enter the Series A and B rounds, can get kind of distracted by these shiny objects, right? And how do you know when it's the right time to scale a startup? How do you know if you're being true to your core? And how do you know like it's time to go into a new vertical or a new channel? Like, what are some telltale signs when it's just the right time, or maybe it's and vice versa when it's too early?
I think you nailed it before, which is it's when it's pull,
Mm,
right? Are people banging down your door from that vertical because they really need it
mm.
tomorrow and they're willing to pay? Or is this a whiteboard exercise where you said, hey, this market is like this market. We should start selling to those
Yeah,
people,
look at this other
right?
bowling pin over here to use the crossing the chasm strategy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, let's just knock down all the bowling pins. That's what bowling
Yeah,
is.
and that's
That
the
one
bowling pin.
gets, I love Crossing the Chasm. Is a really important book, but I do
Mm,
think it gets abused when you start thinking about markets like bowling pins. That is when core starts to become a confusing conversation, and that's when
yeah,
things start to go sideways. If you look at markets as Pac-Man pellets, ready to be
yeah.
consumed, as opposed to very delicate, nuanced buyer personas and patterns and pain points, and so I like to think about it as when you feel that pull beyond a shadow of a doubt, and they are really wanting you to
Mm,
better service them, and when it's clear that you're doing something that is unique for what they're trying to do, great. If it's
yeah.
irresponsible not to go after that market because they want it, that's fantastic. If you're doing it because you planned it out on a whiteboard and you're just going on cold call, or you're going to hire a
Yeah, you
bunch of
got some
people to go,
post-its. You need a design thinking exercise at the retreat in Carmel. And like that looks like another really good vertical for us. Yeah,
yeah,
great. Let's go play golf. We're done. So what
we we figured out growth.
yeah,
Yeah,
what's what are the to get a little more tactical, for the Series A and B founders out there, what should they be looking at for pull? Is it just inbound kind of leads from, hey, this isn't our target core market. This, we were selling into, I don't know, I'm making this up, doctors' offices. And now we're getting, this a lot of inbound from accountants. Is it just like kind of that inbound organic pull?
I think that's a really good sign. It's not that you can't start doing customer discovery in markets that don't know about your product yet. I do think you can have a team of people, but to me, the most important thing, if you are doing it that way, where it's like, we haven't been selling to insurance yet, but we think there's a really good market there, well, make it a very deliberate, quantitative, analytical process. Only get 3 people on it. Don't tell other people about it, because what happens is salespeople will get wind of, you're going to try to sell to insurance, and they're going to want to go sell to insurance, and next thing you know, it's on their
Easy
decks.
pickings.
Yeah, right. So I think it's important. You can compartmentalize a small team of people to go out and validate a market and go have 100 conversations with people who are potential buyers in that market.
Yeah.
And after 100 conversations, hopefully, if it worked, you've got beta customers lined up. You've got people who will hopefully be customers in the future, and you've laid the groundwork for a new vertical that you're going to sell to. So I think you can be analytical and, approach it even if you're not getting that inbound. But absolutely, if you're getting inbound and that's where the market is coming from to you, then that's a really good sign. My partner and I bought a company a couple of years ago. It was a $13 million business at the time. And part of our thesis was they were actually starting to get a lot of inbound from government customers, and they hadn't been selling to government. Right. And so part of the growth thesis for us was they have no idea how to do that. So let's operationalize around it. Let's actually hire people. But it was based on a lot of inbound data, some deals they'd already done in that space. And they just needed to, really build up a stronger go-to-market around it. So it had been validated for that point. And I think that's key.
Yeah. And so let's say the founder thought that this new vertical or channel was the right move. What are some signs that it wasn't? Like, you're going in and like you're kind of looking, you're doing your weekly business review, monthly business review. What are some of these metrics the numbers are showing? Like, is it like close rates? Is it kind of CAC? Is it your churn rate? Is it all the above? Like, what are kind of some of these telltale signs that, like, hey, this isn't working?
I mean, there's a lot of metrics you could point to, but the most important one's your intuition, right? You're out there trying to do it. Is it working or not? Right. So it may be that there's a false positive, like you were talking about before, where you did one deal in that space and then you're like, all right, let's go after it.
Yeah.
Right. But then you realize, well, that one deal was a relationship with your VC, or it's a very unique environment that they had, or, that there was something very specific about that buyer. And every time you try to shop it around to other buyers, they just don't, care as much, or the pain points aren't as strong. So I think, yeah, you can certainly point to, CAC and, close rate, ROI customers are getting. Those are all valid and important. But I think the reality, and this is why it's so important for the CEO to be actively involved in it, is intuition around, are there headwinds? Are we getting beat up out there? Or are we getting, oh my God, we really need this. You got to talk to our CFO. This is hugely important. Like, I'm going to set up a call. Like, that's what you want, right? You want those signs. Yeah. That
leaning
like,
forward.
we
Great.
need you to integrate with this vendor. Can we put you in touch with them?
Yeah. Kind of looking for that. So I've talked to some founder friends that didn't raise venture, and they actually regretted it. They were like, I got it to 4 million of ARR without raising VC, but I think I probably could have had, instead of having like this, let's say it's a $40 million business, 100% of that, maybe I could have had a $400 million business. When do you know it's like the right time to raise venture, and when is it the wrong time, and how long should you bootstrap? And I mean, I think I know as an investor, but I'd love, like, you've been thinking about this a lot longer than I have.
Yeah. And it's a very subjective situation. But I would say, I talked to a guy named Tom Eisenman in the book, and he wrote the book, Why Startups Fail. And he's an HBS professor.
Yeah.
And his advice is, probably what you'd expect from an MBA professor, but it also is really relevant, which is you got to do the analysis, right? I think that to me is key, like to really get in deep so that you've got enough data to build a sense of conviction around what you can actually do in the market. So to me, it's not so much a whether VC, how it's how much based on what is the extent of that market pull and what you can really do in the world. And I think, to me, strategy and real life market conditions and a deep level of analysis on the truth of the market will guide conviction. And that conviction will tell you, what do you need to raise? And it may be VC, it may be private equity, it could be debt, it could be, there's a lot of unique types of VCs out there for different, phases. And maybe it's raise one round and that's your last round and that's all you need, right? And so to me, that's the most important thing, is that CEOs don't look at it as a a binary, but look at it as I'm raising money to fund the ideal trajectory of this business, right? And I've got a deep sense of conviction in what that trajectory will look like. And here's how much money I need. And here's the type of partner who's best suited to help me live out that destiny in our business.
I'd love to talk about, you've been through quite the number of epochs here, right? I mean, you're kind of at the tail end of the .com with Jive and the kind of early 2000s, bootstrapping. And then you had cloud and kind of the proliferation of SaaS and online delivery of software and easy to build and prototype, mobile. And now you could argue, AI, right? So like,
yep.
How does this feel, given your decades of experience in software? How does this paradigm shift, this platform shift kind of feel to you?
The latest, how does AI compare to some of the others?
Yeah.
I think it's a seismic one for sure. I think how seismic and how comparable it is to some of these ones in the past is still too early to say, but I think we're going to see a very, very dramatic shift in the way companies are built, the idea of a company,
yeah,
how companies differentiate. I've been scoping out my next book, which is about competitive advantage through human mechanisms, meaning as technology takes over the kind of block and tackle part of the stack, and technology, a lot of the traditional means of competitive advantage start to diminish, right? As computers can develop their own code, then it gets a lot harder to hold on to competitive advantage in the form of technology and network effects. Yeah. And so I'm trying to say competitive advantage of the future will be based on understanding humans. And so being able to attract the best and the brightest, being able to serve customers through their, not just the market need, but their emotional need, right? And to be able to support human growth for your employees and, things like empathy and imagination and connection and, these things that are going to be more unique in this world. So I think we're going to go through a pretty dramatic shift over the next 10 to 20 years. And, AI is just what we call it right now, but there's just going to be this kind of move towards,
ambient cognition or something.
Yeah.
Where it's just kind of everywhere. You can talk to this AI like it's a person, and it can go execute and do research and just do tasks. And the way I liken it is it's almost as if, the way billionaires live today, right? Or people that have hundreds of millions of dollars, whatever. They have a whole staff and entourage of people that can help them with any kind of task. And in the future, we all have that with AI, right? Everyone has like this army of, on the margin, very cheap to run AI agents that can do their bidding for them. And, it's an interesting thought experiment of economics, right? When the supply cost of labor asymptotes to zero, like what does that even look like in our society?
Yeah. And what is the idea of a business and what's its point and what does it serve? Right. And so
I'm wondering if I'll have a job in venture in 10 or 20 years. Like, I mean, will you need venture capitalists to fund software projects? Or will people just be talking to AIs that just go build stuff willy-nilly on demand in any way, shape, or form or fashion you can imagine?
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing that today, which is this long tail of micro apps that people can build that are filling out these little spaces. But that's the last of this software world, right?
Yeah. Is it the end of software? Yeah. That's an interesting question. Are we living through the end of software?
Right. It ate the world and now it's done.
Yeah. It ate the world
and then
now
software
AI's
ate
eating
software.
Yeah. And now you can on demand just get any software that you need. So what's the point of funding software? Yeah. And I wonder about this. Like, do I only have 2 or 3 funds to go before AI is eating all the software? And there's just no software to really fund anymore because these big monolithic, multi-purpose ChatGPT 10 platforms can go build and do anything that anybody would possibly desire, and couple that with robotics. I mean, what are we even doing? I guess we'll just be on podcasts talking to each other about the past.
Which could be wonderful, right? I mean, I want to believe, the altruist in me wants to believe that, the companies that will continue to exist are ones that people gravitate to because they uphold certain values that people care about. So it's not just about fixing pain points or solving headaches anymore, but it's about up-leveling human civilization. And it's about, reimagining companies as human growth systems that support all of our collective growth, right? That's where people are going to gravitate to. And I want to believe that that's where it goes.
Where it's not so much, about solving this market problem anymore. It's about we're having this technological mode or network effect or platform system of record, things like that. This is the kind of stuff I look at as an investor. It's more about do you have the right mission? Does it align spiritually and mentally and psychologically with people? And that's how you will attract talent in the future, because people will have their choice. The AI is this very democratizing force, and so I had a founder tell me there is no technological differentiation anymore. Everybody has all the same open source stuff they're using, all the same fine-tuned foundational model stuff. It's all the same stuff. And so now, like, what is the moat? Right? What is your advantage? Well, it's really just like kind of your ambition and like, can you get people to follow you?
That's exactly it. So we're going to be humans were the processors in the computer.
Right.
Like we turned ourselves into a computer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was what we did. We just moved data around. Right. So if you just thought of us as processors, and suddenly there's better processors than humans. And we just are slowly backing up and going, okay, I guess you're doing a better job. I'll just be over here if you need me.
Yeah. Why don't we do this other thing? And so it's this democratizing thing where I don't even think we can imagine what society looks like post, autonomous agentic workflows everywhere, agent platforms, because we just can't imagine us without work to do. And I think we'll just invent new things. I know we will, but humans are just, if nothing but creative and endlessly imaginative. And there's always a hedonic treadmill to kind of run. But I think we'll just we'll create things that we can imagine, like YouTube stars, right? What's that? Like if you tried to explain that to somebody in the 80s, when we were growing up, so someday there'll be these like video channels online through TVs, but you'll be able to like watch people create videos and they make millions of dollars a year just creating videos and like streaming it. It'd be hard to explain it to somebody 40 years ago.
Yeah. It's hard to explain it to me now.
It's like Mr. Beast makes how much money? 100 million a year, like creating YouTube videos?
I still shake my head when my kids tell me about some of those. I'm like, what? Really?
Wow. Yeah, it's pretty wild. But we'll have to have you back on when you do the second book, because that's the realm I like to play in, is that futurism, post-scarcity society stuff. You ever watch David Shapiro on YouTube?
No.
Oh, man, look him up. It's really out there, especially if you're starting to kind of delve into these topics, these kind of post-scarcity, futuristic kind of future topics. I want to have him on the podcast at some point. I think he creates like a video every day, and it's always really far out there, post-capitalist, postmodern society stuff. It's really well researched and well thought through. Anyway, why don't we close out with like a rapid fire, if that works?
Sure. Yeah.
If you could go back in time, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Follow your intuition.
I love that. Yeah. And that was a recurring theme, actually, talking about your book and your experiences.
Yep.
And your advice for founders is there anything that you can think of where you're like, I should have followed my intuition there? Besides, the Jive stories and stuff like that. Was there anything in your 20s where you're like, I should have followed my intuition there?
Besides the capital, like just in other parts of my life?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was I got into USC for screenwriting when I was in my 20s, and I had to make a decision between, am I going to go down that route of storytelling, or am I going to go down this route of business? And I think I saw it as a bifurcation. And now it took me this long to realize, oh no, storytelling has just got to be a part of all of it, that you love doing it, figure out a way to tell stories throughout.
Yeah.
And so I think if I had followed my intuition back then, I would have made that a much bigger part of what I did. And
yeah, they're not mutually exclusive, right? You could kind of do a little bit of both, right? And you see people kind of now going back and forth between business and the arts. I think there's kind of dovetails into our conversation about, post-scarcity, AI, agentic society here, where there is a blending. Look at podcasts like this, right? It's just a blending of like art and business. And anyway, what is the most underrated skill in entrepreneurship besides intuition?
Emotional fluidity, which means really being in touch with your emotions, being able to see them for what they are, and move them if they need to be moved. Somebody who is really in touch with their emotional state and knows how to not trap the emotions, but actually get them out.
Yeah.
Turns out to be surprisingly important for decision making and being able to show up as a strong, intuitive leader.
Yeah, this is what struck me as I was running teams at Microsoft, and we were getting trained in the SL2 frameworks and stuff like that. And there's like the 2x2 matrix of, is the person motivated? Yes or no? Like high motivation, low motivation, or high ability, low ability. And there's different management styles. And it always struck me when I was in people conversations, which I thought were the most ridiculous thing at Microsoft, trying to calibrate like who's a star performer. Like everybody who works at a company like that is pretty amazing, right? You can't get a job usually at like this big, amazing tech company without being pretty amazing, right? Having good education and stuff like that. And so it always came down to me. It was like, yeah, it's a matter about how the person feels. It came down to their emotional state. Are
Yeah.
they happy doing what they're doing, and are they happy doing that job with the people they're doing it with? It wasn't so much about their abilities. We always chalked it up to abilities or skills. Oh, maybe they need more training. I was like, no, how do they feel about it? How do they show up?
That's exactly right. And that's why I say emotional fluidity for yourself, because when you do it for yourself, it's much easier to be empathetic and,
Mm-hmm.
to take in somebody else's emotional state, right?
Yeah.
So if I could say listening, that's really important. But if you haven't really done the work to get in touch with your own emotional landscape, you don't know what to listen for. So that's why I think, to me, emotional fluidity is hugely important. And if more people knew that, they would be way more successful.
Yeah, I love that. Do you read Kindle or physical books?
Both.
Yeah, always on my phone, so I don't have any. I don't have a Kindle. I do have a Kindle. I don't use it, and I don't really read paper books anymore. It's always my Android phone. That's
I'm more
just.
audio now. I think as the
Oh
percentage of
yeah,
a whole, audio has gone way up
yeah, me
for
too.
me.
Yeah, I really enjoy that, especially if the author narrates. I think that makes a
Yeah,
huge. Are you going to narrate your own book?
I did. Yeah,
Oh,
it's not
amazing.
available on Audible yet, but I did read it myself. Yeah,
All right. Well,
I
I
put
will
a
go
post out
back and
recently,
listen to
which
it.
is if you ever do your own audiobook, A, don't drink coffee day of, drink tea, and B, don't eat trail mix. So I was like, excuse me. Yeah.
Yeah, you almost have to be in
Uh,
a fasted state. I bet I've started doing intermittent fasting, and I find I've been doing alternate days this week. Where yesterday I played basketball and I didn't eat at all, and I have such tremendous energy when I'm not eating.
yeah.
It's crazy. Like your body just goes into ketosis and just has all the energy that it could possibly need. And I ate a salad for lunch, and I feel so like tired and weighed down. Anyway, what's the first thing you do when you're evaluating a company for potential investment? This is for all my angels and VCs out there.
Spend time with the founders or CEO and really get to know them,
Mm,
both their current state, where they are, their why, understanding what
yeah.
their coachability, their desire for, their growth mindset, and, how willing they are to do it for the right reasons. To me, that's a really important foundation. I'll
Yeah.
spend more time with them.
That's the intuitive part of investing, I find, and the stages I play in, the pre-seed and seed, kind of that first institutional capital. It really comes down to the founders and why they're doing it. I kind of look for the chip on their shoulder a little bit, like they have to prove something, and but they're also like confident without attitude. To borrow a principle from Berkeley, where I went to school for business, we have a concept there called confidence without attitude. So shout out to Berkeley.
Yeah. I actually had this conversation with a pretty high profile seed investor last week. And, he's saying, like, well, I love all the things you're talking about. It seems like most of the successful entrepreneurs are jerks. And I think my response was, and I've worked with a lot of companies like this, it may start from an ego place
Yeah,
with a lot of these folks. They may start with trying to really, push
prove
hard on
something.
everybody
Yeah,
and prove it
yeah.
out through the company. But when it comes to scaling, if they don't shift their energy,
Mm,
then it's very hard to scale it because people don't want to work for that person. They create a lot of challenges in the culture. It becomes a dog eat dog environment. You get poor reviews on Glassdoor, and so to me, I've seen a lot of founders go through that shift. So it's not so much as in they don't have an ego or they're coming in this kind of egoless place. That's not necessarily the case. It's more, are they willing to do what is required and to shift and grow and become what the company needs them to be over the course of time,
mm,
more so than, because it does change, right? And the fuel that got the thing off the ground may be very different than the fuel that gets it to be something great
yeah.
in the long run.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's a lot harder to go from 0 to 1, than 1 to 10 or whatever is the phrase. I don't know if that's true, but that's what people say. And yeah, you almost kind of need that like spark of energy. How do you suss out the coachable versus uncoachable founders? What are there signs or things you look for, questions you ask?
Yeah, I'll ask them about their history, and see how they talk
Yeah.
about it
Mm,
and how much they talk about themselves as the basis for it versus teams versus, what they had to go through. Are they willing to be vulnerable? Are they capable of changing their perspective? Do they have all the answers? Are they willing to say, I don't know, we'll see, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. I
Do they
actually
listen?
didn't know, and here's what I learned.
Yeah.
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 Who's a leader you admire and why?
Ooh, that's a really good one and a hard one. I've been asked this before, and it's always challenging for me to say because but I would say Yvon Chouinard from Patagonia
Oh, yeah.
because of how deeply held his set of values are, how much he kept going and building this thing on his own, owned 100% of the company, and dedicated himself to making this company an example of what the future of companies can look like, how deeply they held the connection to the planet and what they were doing and why they existed and the way they had, they just did things that no normal business would do because it affected the bottom line, but were in the best interest of the customers and the planet. And there was no shareholders to deal with. And so that to me is the future of where things need to go. And that's that type of company you and I were talking about that's going to attract people into its orbit because it stands for something much bigger and is trying to up level all of society and the system and is way bigger than any one person. And that kind of leadership.
Did he leave the company to his employees? Isn't that what happened?
Yeah, it was a whole complex thing where they gave a lot of it to a, kind of a charity that will give out a lot of the money. And then this kind of collective, it was very sophisticated, complicated, but beautiful at the same time. And the important thing being that you need governance that is going to maintain its adherence to a climate first business model. And so I have a good friend that works there. He runs their food business.
Yeah.
And I just did a long interview about what he's doing there. And he's, this is a guy that was a multi-time entrepreneur. It was impossible to imagine him doing anything but entrepreneurship. And he's like, I will go work for this company till the end of the earth. I will work for this company. Right. If you have a company like that, if that's your leadership, you create something that somebody who couldn't even ever imagine working for a bigger company is like, now I can't imagine doing anything but this.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's great leadership. And I think that's like the future of what great companies are going to look like is that style of company.
Yeah. And you gotta, if you haven't found it, if you're listening and you haven't found that thing that you just can't help but do, just keep searching. For me, I didn't find it until I was in my 40s investing in startups, but it took me 20 years of iterating and trying all kinds of stuff, dozens and dozens of jobs and businesses, startups. And it wasn't until I was an investor, I was like, oh yeah, I do this.
I'm still figuring it out.
Well, you're doing it. You're writing books and helping startups, which is it dovetails into another great question, which is like, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what would you be doing?
Well, we talked about before the storytelling thing. I just love telling stories. I guess I am doing that as a part of what I do. I could do it full time, and that would be amazing for me. Just to be able to tell stories and help people change their lives as a result of understanding at a deeper level.
Your next book could do a lot of that too, right? If you're talking about how technology moats are disappearing and how business looks in the future, you can start interviewing founders like the Patagonia founder and people that work there and kind of tell those stories, right?
Yeah. I would love to be like Michael Lewis, but for helping capitalism work better.
Yeah, I love that.
Like that would be my goal. And so maybe that's where it all moves towards over the long run.
Yeah.
For me is more of that storytelling, more of the writing and speaking. Right now, I still like to have a foot in capitalism and meaning being a chairman on company or, coaching people, but being involved in the ebbs and flows of what it's really like to do startups. Because if I lose too much touch with that, I feel like I won't be as good at the other side of it.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. How can people find you and your book?
Yeah, so it's for sale on Amazon right now. It's also davehersh.com, HERSH.com, and doing a lot of posting on LinkedIn. That's the primary source of my socials. As my kids would say, that's the dorkiest of all the socials, but it's kind of where a lot of my content lives.
LinkedIn?
And yeah.
Yeah, me too. That's where I live too. That's my primary hub, even over Twitter or anything else. Yeah.
Exactly. So doing a lot of that and doing speaking. So starting to line up speaking gigs in various cities, and hopefully I can meet a lot of your listeners in person.
Yeah. And so the book is Reignition by Dave Hersh. If you have trouble reminding that, we're the Ignite podcast. So it should be pretty easy to remember. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. This is an awesome conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.